When Command & Conquer first hit the scene in 1995, it blew its way into the top echelon of the marketplace. It ignited a genre and rewrote the rules for what multiplayer could accomplish. But staying at the top is just as tall an order as getting there in the first place. For a little while, Command & Conquer remained unassailable, but as the years went on, other strategy games started to innovate where the old series started to stagnate. Westwood Studios tried to jump the series into other genres, but they stumbled and ended up getting shut down by their owners, Electronic Arts. EA Los Angeles picked up the responsibility for the franchise, and while they released a few solid titles, they didn't shock the world the way the earlier games had. Then EA LA too tried to jump genres, and they too fell flat on their face. Moving on from that failure, the team had to ask what they were going to do with the series. They knew that they were treading water, but every time they tried to make a change, they met with disaster. And so EA LA decided to innovate as much as they could within the familiar boundaries of the franchise. And while at first they seemed to find some success, in the end it led them to kill off the series that had changed the world 15 years earlier. When Westwood created the first game in the Red Alert series, it was largely the same as the original Command & Conquer, just a little more wacky. In 2000, Westwood's sister studio in Irvine released Red Alert 2, which took wacky to a whole new level. So after Command & Conquer 3 finished, EA LA decided it was time to make another Red Alert, and they were going to put the wackiness of the others to crying shame. The team made certain that nothing in the new game was in the least bit remotely plausible. Transforming robots, armored bears, candy colors, and ostracized psychic Japanese schoolgirls. Yep, they would all be enlisting for duty.
I'm not some freak.
The plot was a suitably mindless affair involving yet more time travel having yet more unintended consequences, in this case, the rise of a hyper-mechanized Japan to rival the Soviet Union and the West. To tell such a tale, it was important to cast actors that could handle the weight and gravitas of this classical tragedy. And so, EA managed to get great performances from the likes of Tim Curry, J.K. Simmons, George Takei, and Tanya herself got played by Jenny McCarthy. Aside from its neon color trip, the game was also notable for featuring a co-op campaign for the first time in an RTS, and for truly bringing in the Navy as a major part of the arsenal. EA LA was doing what they could to reinvigorate their stagnating series. When it released in October 2008, Command & Conquer Red Alert 3 got good reviews and was considered a worthy addition to the CNC name. But unfortunately, the co-op and Navy weren't enough. Once again, the same old complaint, that once again the title felt little different from its predecessors. But EA LA seemed to roll on. In July 2009, they announced Command & Conquer 4, a return to the original storyline. But it was going to be more than just that. It was going to be the end of the tale, the last and final of the Tiberium conflicts. Later that year, they had a public vote for what the subtitle should be, and the fans voted in droves for Tiberian Twilight, the name Westwood had wanted for when they finished CNC. And so, excitement in the fan community was running high to finally see how the story would play out, how the aliens fit into the overarching storyline, how supervillain Kane would finally succeed or fail. In March 2010, Command & Conquer 4 Tiberium Twilight hit shelves, and stunned audiences. EA LA hadn't just rolled on, they'd changed everything. There was no harvesting, there were no buildings, there were no tech trees. There was just a mobile base, a single structure that produced all the players' units. Resources came from capturing control points around the map. Once the player had enough resources, he could build any unit he wanted. And that was it. Even with 3 different mobile bases to choose from, which produced different units, this new game style was much faster paced and effectively lost the strategy in real-time strategy, becoming a tactics game that frankly was more about sheer numbers than anything else. Lost units could quickly and easily be replaced so long as the player held enough control points, so victory was a simple matter of outproducing your foe. Victory itself was now achieved by gaining points, a complete stylistic shift from the entire rest of the franchise. Additionally, high-level units weren't unlocked by anything you could do in a given match. Rather, to get the big guns, you had to level up your profile by playing match after match after match for weeks on end. While this level up and unlock system has worked great in the shooter realm, it completely unbalanced the tactics game, since new players found their weak units facing off against a veteran's fully unlocked army. Meanwhile, the game's story felt rushed and was generally considered inferior to earlier games. No big-name actors came in this time around, other than Joe Can returning for one last performance as Kane.
Once the TCN is online, you can have your planet back. And I can finally ascend.
The ending in particular was universally panned as a terrible conclusion to a story 15 years in the making. All put together, it made for a disappointing end to the journey. Instead of being a loving tribute to one of gaming's most iconic brands, Command & Conquer 4 took the series out with a whimper. In 1995, Command & Conquer was a breath of fresh air in a risk-averse industry, a jolt to the system that catapulted Westwood Studios to towering success. Less than 8 years later, Westwood shut its doors for good, and their series had already begun its slow descent. No matter how dominant it looks at the time, any series can fall apart if the creative team behind it loses the passion and vision they had in the first place, or if that team is shown the door by their bosses. Even with such a great start, Command & Conquer was no exception. That being said, with the possible exception of Tiberium Twilight, every Command & Conquer game has its own stable of dedicated fans. It may not be what it once was, but even after the death of Kane, CNC still has some life left in it. Electronic Arts has confirmed that a team at EA LA is in the early stages of the next title. What it will be and what changes it will make remain to be seen. Until then, EA has recently re-released the original game as a free download. So whatever the future may hold, it's never too late to warp back through time and Command & Conquer like it's 1995.